and welcome to this third and final instalment for the Touchpoint webinar series. This one is about using the right touchpoint for the right job. And there are three key points that we're going to talk about in this session. The first is understanding that each brand is unique in terms of which touchpoints work best for it. Unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The second is that touchpoints are multitasking because that's how consumers use them. So brands need to be prepared to use the touchpoints in the way that consumers expect them to be. And thirdly, that shopper touchpoints can also be equity drivers, not just sales channels. I often get asked by brands, what's the answer? What are the most influential touchpoints that I should be focusing on? And unfortunately, there is no one-size-fits-all answer. There's no single solution that works for every brand everywhere. Take this example of a car brand in Germany versus China. And you can see that the top most influential touchpoints differ between the countries. And in China, we see that digital touchpoints are more influential than in Germany. But you might say, well, that would be expected, no news there. Well, let's take a look at what it looks like within country for different categories and different brands. What we see here is that across 5 key touch points, when we have a look at different brands across categories, but even within categories, we see very different levels of influence of those touch points on brand equity. So the different dots here represent the different brands and the colours represent the different categories. And you can see that if I said that a customer magazine was completely influential, that would be a terrible piece of advice for the brand for which the customer magazine was having a negative impact on equity. But for other brands, it's a really positive driver of equity. So the key thing here is that brands need to understand which are the most influential touchpoints for them in their category, in their country, and tailor their touchpoint strategy accordingly. Our second challenge is that some touchpoints don't always behave the way that you expect them to, and in fact don't always behave the way that they historically have. Taking social media as an example, when we have a look at how consumers ideally want to interact with brands through social media, we see that plenty of them want to use it to access branded content, but they also want to use it as a source of information, to ask questions and get customer service, to express an opinion, and with the increasing usage of click to buy, we will also see social being a purchase channel as well. And the challenge for brands is that they need to be able to respond through a channel in the way that the consumer expects them to. So let's look at e-commerce a little further. E-commerce is an interesting one because it originally started off as being purely an extension of the sales mechanism. It was a way to get your products to consumers in a more convenient way. And as it has evolved, we see e-commerce growing beyond commerce. E-commerce is now as much about engagement as it is about transactions. And there's a lovely quote from Forbes last year, which talks about cleaning the store and training your staff every day in your offline store, yet leaving your online site unattended is no longer acceptable. And this talks to the importance of the online store and e-commerce sites in driving engagement and equity for brands. It really gives consumers a new reason to visit, and the brands that really do this well, that use e-commerce as an engagement channel, give consumers those reasons to keep coming back. So Mr. Porter is a lovely example where they post interviews with designers. They have other content that might normally be distributed through different channels, actually available through the e-commerce site. And that is what encourages consumers to return again and again over time. And this is brought to life quite vividly when we look at this example of a day in the life of a 38-year-old South Korean woman who spent her day, whenever she had a bit of downtime, checking an e-commerce site, and she checked it frequently and habitually, the way that many of us might check Facebook or check our emails. And she would, throughout the day, have a look at what was new, read some things, put some things in her shopping cart. When she got home, she spent a couple of hours quite intensively having a look at the products that she had saved in her shortlist, looking at the product details, and eventually purchasing a small percentage of those. Now, if we were looking at this through a pure commerce lens, we would say that that's a really inefficient website, and only 8% purchase was a pretty low result, and there was a lot that had been discarded through the purchase journey. But when you change the lens and look at the purpose of this site as an engagement site, it suddenly becomes a really powerful asset for this brand, because this woman has incorporated it into her life and returns again and again. And this happens not just in the online world. In fact, offline retailers also are challenged to understand how their stores are working in today's touchpoint landscape. An example of this is a retailer in Europe who worked out through a touchpoint study that their sales staff on their floors actually weren't sales drivers. They were much more influential in driving equity for this department store than in driving sales. And that totally forces a rethink in terms of how they train their staff and what value they expect to get out of their staff, and how they can encourage their staff to be an engagement channel and an equity driver. So what have we learned about using the right touchpoint for the right job? Well, we learned that each brand is unique in which touchpoints work best for it, so it's really critical to understand your unique mix of influential touchpoints, which ones work for your brand. We need to understand that touchpoints are multitasking, because that's how consumers use them, and so brands need to set themselves up to make key touchpoints do many jobs and be responsive in the way that they interact with consumers. And finally, shopper touchpoints can also be equity drivers, not just sales channels, and that has implications in terms of how you manage your online and your offline sales spaces. You've heard about a lot of touchpoint challenges and hopefully some great ideas about what you can do about them. There's a lot to think about, but it's manageable. So we've put together 6 critical considerations for you to take into account when planning your touchpoint management. The first is to focus on the moments that matter. Make sure you identify what are the right things to focus on for your brand and focus on those. When you do that, you need to make sure that you are taking a holistic view of touchpoints, and that's the second principle. Your top 10 touchpoints are going to be a mix of paid, owned and earned touchpoints, and these are the ones that are going to have the biggest impact on your brand. So make sure when you identify the moments that matter, you're looking holistically. The third principle is reduce complexity. Make sure that you're just focusing on the moments that matter and executing those excellently. And when you do that, it means that you can stop chasing after the latest fad and worrying about all the things that you're not doing, and know that you're focusing on the right things. The fourth principle is about breaking down silos in the organisation. In order to deliver that consistent and coherent consumer experience, we need to make sure that everyone in the organisation is thinking about the consumer at the heart of what they're doing and moving forward on the same page. We need to make sure that we're focusing on maximising brand value and sales value, because if we do both of these things, we're looking after the short-term and the long-term interests of the brand and making sure that we've got touch points that are doing both of those jobs. And finally, we need to think about the financial implications. And if you identify the moments that matter, execute them excellently, know which job each touch point is doing, and make sure that the whole organisation is aligned to deliver on those goals, then you're going to see great returns on investment from your touchpoint management. Thank you for joining us for the Kantar TNS Touchpoint Management Series. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to hear any more about any of the topics covered, please feel free to get in touch and we'd be delighted to come and discuss further. Thank you.